Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Movie Mates podcast. I am Matthew, joined by my wonderful co-host and best friend.
Callum.
Hey man, great to see you.
Fuck, that was loud, wasn't it? I screamed that. Sorry.
I missed you, Callum. I missed you because it's weird because the viewers
Missed you,
probably won't
dude.
realize this, but like we tend to record every other day or every third day, so it's weird because this has probably been the longest gap we haven't seen each other in quite a while over lockdown, isn't it, man?
Yeah, no, normally we're meeting up, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. But it's been a while since I've seen you.
It's great to see
We've
you,
we've
man.
had some scheduling conflicts and such. So yeah, it's been a while since I've seen you. Great to chat to you.
Absolutely, but yeah, likewise. And yeah, as you guys have seen by the title, it's part four. Yeah, part four of our Disney franchise review, Walt Disney Animation Studios review, that thing. So I'm just gonna pass over to Callum because we've got four, as we mentioned in the last episodes and a couple episodes ago. We have four big hitters today. Like these are four. We've covered episodes before, movies that we hadn't heard of and other people hadn't heard of, like Saludos Amigos, Three Caballeros, that sort of stuff. This episode is
Shit. Let's be honest, Yeah.
yeah, but this episode, these are four big Disney. I'll use the term classics. We'll be the judge of that. We'll be the judge of that. But I'm just going to pass over to Callum to explain what four animated movies we're going to be talking about today. So Callum, off to you, my friend.
Well, I just want to open by saying this. It feels like we've been doing this for a very long time. Like
Absolutely
the
does.
the Pix the
Absolutely.
Pixar films, like we record 3 times a week or so. So you would think that doing 15 episodes of Disney of the Disney franchise, that wouldn't take that long.
Yeah,
It's taken a fucking long time.
it really is,
It
man.
feels like we've been doing this forever, and it's probably just the pain of having to suffer through the quality of films that we've had so far. And
Absolutely.
there are some exceptions today, and some that sort of fall into the trappings of the previous ones that we've talked about. But speaking of the films that we're going to talk about today, we'll first be starting with Alice in Wonderland. Moving on to
Peter Pan, is it?
Peter Pan.
Peter Pan.
Yes, then Lady and the Tramp, and then Sleeping Beauty. It's just I watched these in reverse order.
Me
I
too,
usually watch
actually.
them
Me too.
in order of release, but I started with Sleeping Beauty and finished with Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, it's
Is
weird.
that what you did?
Well, I did Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, Alice, and then Peter Pan. So similar way to you. And yeah, like as Callum said, those are the four like movies we're going to be talking about today. And just before we kick off our podcast today, thank you for everyone who has watched our latest podcast as well, because we're really glad that people who left comments. We always do appreciate that, and it was very kind, and it brought a warm feeling to our hearts. I would say, like it was nice to hear other people's thoughts in the film as well, especially in such a
Yeah,
special film like Hamilton. And as Callum said, we do record 3 times a week, and it is nice to. It is nice to watch a new movie once in a while. Do you know what I mean? Because this is the first release
yeah.
since Scoob, I think, or Artemis Fowl. But yeah,
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, can't forget that. But yeah, it was really nice to see that people enjoyed it because we were talking about such a wildly different film. We'd never
absolutely,
discussed a live filmed on stage musical. So I mean, it was a completely different viewing
absolutely, man.
experience because I'd never seen a film like that before, and we'd certainly never discussed a film like that. There was one slight mistake that I made because I talked about the fact that it was obviously filmed live on stage, and I said how perfectly performed it was, but I did later find out that it was filmed over 3 performances. So
Okay.
they had the wide shots from 2 performances, and then they did one performance with no audience to get the close-ups, which makes full sense. I just didn't have that knowledge when we were doing the review.
Oh, me neither, man, me neither. But yes, yeah, we've also created. Well, Callum's very kind of created a musicals playlist for you guys. So I think we covered musicals in episode 13 or something. So be sure to check that out if you like Hamilton. There's some great ones in there. We talked about. I think we talked about like La La Land, and then the classics like Willy Wonka and stuff. And so yeah, be sure to check out that wee playlist there. It should be at the top of the playlist section. And yeah, man, thank you to everyone who's recently supported us. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe and share. And yeah, as we've said, email us at moviematespodcast@gmail.com for any questions or podcast suggestions. So yeah, man, shall we kick off the pod then? Yeah,
Yes, we should. And we'll
no
be starting
worries.
with Alice in Wonderland. And what is very special about today's episode is that there is at least more than one that is, passable.
Yeah,
I feel like with the 3 previous episodes, there's been I mean, like one that outshined all the others, but even then wasn't actually even that good. But
That's a great
here
point. Good
here
point.
I would argue there are four incredibly entertaining, yet so in some cases wildly flawed films.
Absolutely.
And we'll start with Alice in Wonderland, of which I don't have much to say. Not a huge amount,
Yeah,
especially for what I consider such a classic.
absolutely, man. And it's one of those films where you hear a lot about it. There's so many iconic characters in this one, and there's so many iconic scenes in and of itself, and it's probably certainly up to this point the most creative Disney film I would say we've reviewed in terms of like how different it is from the classic fairy tale, if you know what I mean. So no, I'm super excited for this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would say visually it's probably similar to the best parts of Fantasia and sort of that psychedelic acid trip in Dumbo, but
Yeah,
they're actually able to maintain like a linear storyline throughout the film.
absolutely.
So it sort of does what they succeeded in, but improves upon it. And I think we have to say that it goes without saying that it has incredibly beautiful animation, and
Oh,
I would say Disney by this point, Disney was pretty much stepping up the game every single film, or at
absolutely.
least they would plateau. Whereas I feel like in a couple of episodes that we've discussed, a couple of films that we've discussed in the previous episodes, there has been at some points like a decline, like between film to film. I would say definitely apparent in the package films, but there are obviously budgetary and animation excuses for that, or explanations. I mean,
Yeah.
so that's definitely forgivable. But this especially in the episode that we're talking about today, you can see the clear progression in quality of animation.
That's such a great point, Callum. I completely agree, buddy. And what it is, we've mentioned before in films like, Pinocchio and Dumbo and of course like Cinderella, these films, Disney's very good, I think, at building a very expansive universe with so many different personalities from the characters. And I think this is really evident here. You can really get a sense of each character's personality, from the caterpillar to the Mad Hatter to the evil queen or the White Queen. There's so much great stuff in here. I definitely think, what Disney does well also is how you can identify yourself with one specific character, and there's so much in there, and I think this is a real marvel, to be honest, of just filmmaking in general. Like, and that's probably why it spawned so many like sequels and live action films as well.
Yeah, would you agree that I've sort of found this in the Disney films that we've watched that when a film is based on source material, like obviously this film's based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll.
Mhm.
I find that the best Disney films are the ones based on source material,
A
and then
great point.
often the ones that don't have a basis are usually shit. Let's be honest. Obviously there's Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty. They're based on great like Brothers Grimm fairy tales. And I think it's usually with that source material basis, it provides a strong foundation that leads to a good film. But without that, it's usually lacking.
You know what, Callum? I completely agree, buddy. And I think it was last episode or maybe a couple episodes ago we talked about the adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And that they're based. Well, I think the Ichabod bit is
Yeah,
based
yeah.
off a real life literature piece, and I think that's probably why we enjoyed it so much as well. And in a similar way to how I view this film, I think you're completely right, buddy. When Disney has source material to borrow from, I think it excels as just generally.
Yeah, I mean, Disney sort of pumps out obviously the most content of any studio currently today. Basically, just because they've bought and absorbed
Yeah,
every possible company they can except for Sony, basically. And aside from that, there are a few smaller studios, but they pump out a huge percentage of the current media content that we see. But I just don't think that they're particularly adept at creating original content. They say like Disney original series or whatever, but then it's based on a Marvel comic. It's based on
exactly,
George
man. Great
Lucas's
point.
Star Wars. I don't think Disney is. I don't think it's considered like the House of Ideas. That's Disney's
Borrowed
moniker.
ideas.
But I don't I like aside from aside from the creation of original characters like Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, most of which I don't particularly enjoy.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a lot of originality in Disney.
It's not like, ugh, I don't know. I'll edit that out. I don't know why. Yeah, I'm just gonna add that whole, but I don't know what I was saying. Like, that's such an underrated point, what you just mentioned there, buddy, completely. And yeah, I haven't actually heard anyone really mention that, and it's so interesting because you know what I think that this film does really well is that, you know, it mixes the fairy tale story with like a coming of age story throughout, you know, of Alice really. And it's strange because, you know, as an 18-year-old boy or 18-year-old man, and you know, back in my youth when I was a boy, like I'd always find myself, you know, by the nature of me, just relating more to male protagonists. Like I don't know, like it's just something that when I was younger, I always related myself to like Spider-Man rather than Wonder Woman. You know what I mean? And I suppose like I don't know if that's the same for you or the same for other people our age, but that's how it was for me. But I must say, in this film, I thought Alice was completely compelling, and I thought she was really not only relatable, but I thought she was a fantastic lead protagonist, and it's really refreshing to see like a young, you know, girl to be that protagonist. I thought it was great. You know, I think if I had saw this when I was, you know, 8 or 9, when I was like, you know, idolizing Spider-Man and Superman and Batman, I think I would have absolutely adored this movie, you know, as I do now. I know I don't know if you agree, man. Were you the same?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think sort of the charm, a lot of it comes from her accent as well, because she has sort of like, you know, a fairy tale English accent and sort of a regal Queen's English, but it's not ridiculous, you know, it's not annoying, you know, it's not it's not screaming I'm an American doing a, you know, exaggerated British
Yeah,
accent like it is, you know, Jonathan Groff in Hamilton where he's playing King George III, because you know that's a joke that's intended to take the piss out of the British.
yeah.
Whereas this actually comes across very appealing and charming.
Completely, buddy, completely. And you know, I think what, you know, how I think what's so great about Alice's character as well is because she's like, I think she's the perfect mix of like capable but also innocent. You know, she like handles herself very well, and all the like the action scenes, if you can call it that. Like she's not like, you know, she's not very, you know, vulnerable, if you can call it that. I mean, she is in one particular scene where she's like crying by herself, and I actually is one of my favorite scenes in the film, just because like you can actually feel for her and sympathize with her in that point. So you know, I think, you know, we've talked about a lot about like, oh, how certain female characters that the Disney lore or like quote like damsel in distresses, you know, as they're called. But I think Alice is anything but that. You know, I think she's very compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I have written the word "she's a fucking idiot," but I'll maybe
Well,
revise that and
yeah,
just say she's a bit naive because obviously
yeah,
she's in an unfamiliar world. But if I were in an unfamiliar, weird dreamland, my first instinct wouldn't be, you know, just eat this random food that's on a table that says "eat me." You know, I'd be a bit suspicious, you know, a bit dubious before
yeah,
just because I mean, you know, she you know, drinks the drink which makes her smaller, then she eats the food that makes her grow, and then when she goes to, you know, the White Rabbit's house, she sees more food and she's like, "Oh yes, thank you." Like, you know, and
yeah.
it says "eat me," but she doesn't assume it to have the same repercussions as the food that she ate earlier. So that's where I was like, you know, I mean, I wrote that she's well spoken but a fucking idiot, and
Yeah.
it's perhaps a bit harsh,
I
but she's
absolutely.
certainly naive.
Yeah, I've certainly written something similar. I know I said, you know, I understand Alice is curious about the Wonderland, but I would definitely be thinking about how I'm going to get home.
Yeah, she only seems to become concerned with that about halfway through, where she starts like trying to find a path and trying to find a guide to take her home. But until that, she's just endlessly and, you know, meaninglessly like chasing a white rabbit. Who, I mean, you have no connection to this character, but you're just obsessed with following him. And he's saying, I'm late," and she's desperate to know what he's late to. And it turns out that he's, you know, late to this sort of presentation of this queen that kills a bunch of people. So she was very wrong to latch onto that character as someone that's admirable and admirable. Sorry, that's the same word. Admirable who needs to be followed and like to find out what his process is. You know,
It's a good
it
point.
really seemed that she
Yeah.
shouldn't have put all her eggs in the white rabbit basket.
That's a great point, buddy. That's a great point. I suppose that can be forgiven because I think, what is she, like 12 or something in this film? I suppose that to a certain extent we can forgive that, but yeah, like I think it definitely borders on the edge of, you know, becoming annoying. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a very general point that I think pretty much sums up the entire film.
Yeah,
And
go
it
for
seems
it.
like most things that are in this film, you know, most sequences, most songs, most stories are a good idea with great visuals, but they just go on far too long. And I would have two particular examples of that. One would be the story that the Tweedledee and Tweedledum tell about
The
a
walrus.
walrus that
Yeah.
ate a bunch of oysters, and then I would say the Flower song. I think both of those sequences are good ideas and they look incredible, but they go on for far too long, and I
I
think
think
it
you've
just
hit,
needlessly extends the runtime.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, buddy. And you know what it is? I think, if credit where credit's due, like you said, buddy, the music and the animation and the colors is so well done. But that being said, I don't think they blend together very well. This film it feels strangely a bit like a package film, from the sense that it feels like you've got a lot of different ideas and mesh them in together. And I get that's the idea of the Wonderland, that that's the premise of it. But
Yeah,
it sort of felt a bit disconnected for me, because it sort of, but by the end of it, it turns in like a weird courtroom drama. It is quite a
yeah.
weird one, but I suppose that can be forgiven if that is intentional.
No, but I definitely agree with you because it sort of has you question how the universe works without Alice, because she seems to be the only character that like tenuously connects all of these people. Like she visits each of them: the caterpillar, the Cheshire Cat, the Mad Hatter, and then the Red Queen. So she's the only character that creates like a through line for all these characters. So I mean, how do they interact when she's not there?
It's a
It
good
it
point.
just seems like an incomplete universe. Uh, and speaking of the Queen of Hearts, for being probably the top five most iconic characters in this film, she shows up very late in the game. I expected her
Absolutely.
to be sort of a villainous presence throughout the entire film, but she shows up in the last like quarter of the film or so.
Yeah, yeah, and it's weird because because this film is really short compared to modern standards. The last quarter of the film is like the last 15 or 20 minutes, isn't it? So it's a weird one.
Yeah,
It's a weird one. Like I had watched half of it last night and then put the other half on after work, and I'd realized I'd like half an hour left, and the Red Queen still hadn't showed up yet. So I was like, where's she? When's she coming? When's she coming? But I had watched the live action one that came out. I think it was the Tim Burton one. Yeah, it was the Tim Burton one.
yeah.
It came out about a decade ago, and I actually
Hmm.
really enjoyed it. But the two movies are strikingly different. I think Alice in the Tim Burton one is like 20 or 19. She's aged up a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a strange one, man. That one is good, granted. That one's very good. But this, I don't know. This film has a special charm to it, I think.
yeah. I have to assume that the live action one draws a lot more from the source material, but then adds that sort of like dark hue to it. So I assume that the novel, whilst I haven't read it, I assume it's a blend of sort of the Tim Burton plot with this, visual like sense of wonder, like child, like through the eyes of a child
Yeah,
situation. So I assume that both drew sort of different interpretations from the source material.
yeah,
Did you have anything to say sort of before getting on to the ending of the film? Because not a huge,
yeah. It's not a huge.
there isn't a huge amount that happens in this film.
I just have a little bit about the ending, buddy. So you crack on, man. You crack on.
Yeah, I mean, my comments just sort of on the quality of the ending, in that it seems probably one of the most lackluster, anticlimactic endings I've ever seen in my life. It doesn't even what I would expect from this film. I sort of from my understanding of pop culture, I thought it was just objectively true that she went to Wonderland. I didn't think it was like a Wizard of Oz scenario where it was like, was it a dream, was it not? So I actually thought she definitely went to Wonderland, whereas it's the complete opposite, where it basically leaves no ambiguity and just says no, it was a dream.
Yeah, and that
Well,
kind
like,
of got me.
was that what you took from it?
Yeah, I had a point here, buddy, and I kind of wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts on this. Like, is this the movie of, sorry, is this movie the origin of, a story happens and then it ends with then I woke up? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, that was definitely what I took from it.
is this like the origin of that stereotype or cliche? Because it certainly seemed that way for me, because it sort of seemed like, okay, the plot's progressing here. Alice is on the run for the Red Queen and yada yada yada. But then it ends up, she's just sleeping. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it was a weird one.
Did you take it as definitively she was definitely dreaming, or do you think there's any like wiggle room of interpretation? Because I don't think there is.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me feel a little bit like stupid, like criticizing Alice for being quite inept and stuff, because technically it's not Alice; it's just her a figmentation of what she would do in that scenario. Do you know what I mean? We're not actually criticizing a character here. We're criticizing a character who's having a dream about herself. Do you know? It's a weird. I don't know if you
Yeah,
get me.
yeah, exactly.
It's like if you had a dream and I'm criticizing how you act in the dream. Like you like you act totally different in real life than you would in a dream. That's why it's a dream. Do you know what I mean? So it's just such a
Yeah,
strange ending. It blew me away, to be honest, and maybe not in a good way.
yeah, and I kind of feel bad for her because like she's dreaming and like this is meant to be her like her ideal scenario, and then people are just like, oh, for fuck's sake, Alice, you're a fucking monster. You're an idiot. She has, created this world in her head. She sang about the fact that she wants to go to Wonderland where nothing makes sense and everything can be enjoyed because there's no responsibilities or whatever.
Mhm.
And then she goes and everyone just hates her. So I kind of feel
Yeah,
bad.
I
Uh,
know, I
but
know.
yeah, as you said, we can't judge her behavior in a dream. But I suppose it's the question of, was it all a dream, or was she just sort of like teleported back to her location where she woke up and time just didn't move? But obviously, if she never moved from her place, she never chased the white rabbit. So I think the film maybe wants us to question it, but then they mistakenly left it too closed because with the way they left it, it was just a dream. So I,
Yeah.
I guess we just have to take it on face value.
It's a great point, man. And I actually don't have anything other points for this movie. This is sort of a strange review from our points because this is probably less plot orientated than we're usually go into. But I think this film, because there's a lot of themes in there, it's good to explore them in generally. But I don't have anything left, buddy. Anything from you?
No, nothing for me. So I'd like to hear your rating of the film, Matthew.
So, yeah, Callum. So my last point about this film was probably quite harsh. I said, well, maybe not. I put strangely boring, but that being said, Alice
Yeah,
is one of my favorite protagonists so far in Disney, so that kind of makes up for it. But for a film that's about a Wonderland, it is strangely boring. I don't know if you got that as well. So for me, I would say 7.5 out of 10. Very, very good film. Obviously very important in terms of the Disney lore and stuff and how it moving forward. But yeah, it was okay. 7.5. What about you, man? I'd love to hear your rating.
yeah. So certainly Wonderland is very visually interesting, but I didn't really get a sense of world. It didn't really. It felt like she was going from location to location rather
Exactly.
than moving across a landscape. Like it didn't feel like one world. But I do think that she is a protagonist made up for it, just as you said. And I'm glad that we finally sort of reached the point in Disney where like quality and enjoyment meet. Because we've
Yeah.
sort of had to separate that before. And
Mm.
now I would say that largely in the case of the films that we're talking about today, certainly, my ones are going to be the same because now they've gotten to the point where like the quality matches up with the enjoyment. Well, I should say the enjoyment matches up with the quality because usually our quality rating is much higher. But yes, I would have to concur on the 7.5 for
That's
Alice
great,
in
buddy.
Wonderland.
No worries, man. I was great. I thought you made some fantastic points in there, buddy, as always. So did you want to crack on? Is it Peter Pan next? Yeah.
It is Peter Pan next, and I'm gonna have some shit to say
I thought so. I
because
thought so.
this film is deeply problematic, but that sort of doesn't those problems don't really arise until maybe
Two
a
thirds in.
third or a half into the film.
Yeah.
There are issues throughout which will be discussed as we go through the plot, but I would say that this is the most uh like cultural depiction wise the most offensive Disney film that had been produced by this point.
Yes, I agree completely, and I think it's strangely, they're very two different films. But I think this film and Dumbo, our reviews is going to be quite similar in the way, like we spoke about it was Dumbo with the birds, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I do think this is next level
Yeah.
problematic, and
Oh yes.
I've never heard anyone discuss this. Like I've heard people discuss the crows and Dumbo, and obviously not being from either of those communities in that scenario, I cannot deem what would be offensive to people in that culture. But I think I can perceive from an outside view what like I feel like we're educated enough to recognize when something isn't okay.
Yeah, this film is certainly full of outdated cultural depictions, man. And yeah, you're right, Callum. I'm surprised it hasn't been brought to anyone's attention sooner. To be honest, I haven't heard of this until I watched it really, and I'm glad that you agree, man, because I think this is going to be an interesting discussion, certainly to delve deep into this film. But I'm just happy to go by your opening remarks, buddy. Anything from you?
Yeah, so I sort of think that the story peaks in the first third and then in the final third, but I think there's a messy middle, morally and depiction wise, and even plot wise. But we'll start at the beginning, and we're introduced to the Darling family as I think a lot of people would be very aware of those characters in pop culture and in fiction.
Mhm.
And what really took me aback was that the youngest child, Michael, is aggressively American.
Yeah, it's a weird one, man, because we've talked about like accents before, and like cultural depictions about with Alice and stuff. Sort of her accent is very, you know, it's very like it's not overly British, but it's a nice little like posh accent. But this one, yeah,
it's like storybook fairy tale Queen's English, but
it
like
is.
this is just like this kid, you know, and sort of the darlings are even more like you know that I would say they're even, you know, more insanely British, you know, sort
Oh
of
yeah,
like
Oh, I know.
you know how people would, yeah, how people would mock the incredibly posh,
yeah,
but then Michael is just so like he is just so American, and
yeah.
I didn't understand.
And speaking of accents in this film and voice actors, one bit of movie trivia, you know, we like to cover movie trivia as well when we review films. That one bit of movie trivia that did blow me away was that Wendy is the same voice actress as Alice in the previous film that we covered. So that's I thought
Oh
that was,
really?
yeah, yeah.
I think I would have maybe noticed that if I'd watched them in order. Sorry, what the fuck would I? Never mind. I said order. It sounded fucked. But yeah, if I'd watched them in order, I think that I maybe would have picked up on that. But they just both sounded you know, very upper class.
Yeah, it's an interesting bit of movie trivia because I actually thought, you know, the voice work for Alice in Alice in Wonderland was great. So I'm glad to see her be reused as Wendy in this film. So, you know, good on her.
Yes, and Wendy's sort of beginning story arc of the film is that, my God, her dad wants her to move out of the nursery. What? Like a
What?
grown child?
I
What will
know.
they do? Maybe hang out in the fucking living room like normal people? Like she's like,
Yeah.
oh, but how could I possibly see my siblings if we don't share the same bedroom? I'm like, see them literally anywhere else.
Yeah, and you know the dad does get a lot of shit in this film for like,
He should.
yeah, yeah, and you know, despite his dismissal of his kids' dreams and their fantasies and their imagination, like he's not like, you know, he's not great, but he's not the worst. But I do agree, like he probably should get criticized to a certain extent. But like, yeah, like you can see your siblings other places, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the dad definitely softens by the end of the film, but at the beginning he is acting like a douche.
Yeah.
Also, like, what is that sort of like weird, like hard cardboard like facade to his shirt? Like he says, "I'm looking for my shirt front," and then he like sticks this cardboard thing
I guess like
like on his
a
chest.
corset, but like or like Ben Affleck stick on abs or something.
Yeah, like you like to look like you have like a built chest. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But
Would
I
you
don't know how
wear
you're
one of
like
those?
drawing on that in chalk and then wiping it off. Like it was bizarre.
Yeah. Would you ever like would you ever wear a muscle suit?
I would not, Matthew.
No.
You know, I try to go for the relatively tight fitting
Yeah.
you know trousers when I'm going for a more formal suit.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think that would be a look for me. Also, don't need it, you know.
Yeah, yes, I was about to say. You know, I
Yeah,
always find
it's
it
you
quite
know.
funny. Like you know, in like kids' Spider-Man costumes and Batman costumes, they have like the inbuilt muscles. I always thought they were so strange.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do with that when you're like if you actually have biceps and then they just have like a weird foam one? Like, does it just look really fucked?
It must look so like disproportionate.
Well, yeah, because I mean, you know, it's sort of the like the this is so weird, but like you know the length and height of like the fake biceps that they have is like the same size as like an average guy's biceps. So if you
Yeah,
have an average guy's bicep, like your bicep looks the right length but just insanely high.
exactly, exactly. Like you know, I love going off on like tangents. This podcast, it's some of my favorite.
Yes, and to return to the film that we're talking about today, Peter Pan seems like a misogynistic prick. Uh, for example,
I agree.
in his first few minutes of screen time,
Where
this is the phrase
Matthew
that he
from?
says to Wendy, "Get on with it, girl," as he sits back and looks at his sits back and looks at his pan flute, and he only listens to women when they're telling stories about him.
Bastard.
He like we'll talk about like he gets worse, let's be honest, but you know he's trying to like slip a shadow onto him like with soap, and then Wendy presents like an actual solution to the situation,
Mhm.
and you know she's just trying to speak to him and he's just not giving two shits, and yet like all these women in this film are like fawning after him. I don't understand it.
Yeah, and there's one line that comes right after that is when he says, relaxing in his chair, girls talk too much, and I thought, so do some boys, Peter. You know, it's not just a girl thing. You know, that's it's very
Yeah.
insensitive to say, and you know that's definitely a credit, and it definitely gets worse than that. and you are right. Like he's one of my least favorite protagonists, if you can call them that, in the entire Disney lore so far.
Yeah.
You know, it gets a lot worse with his. Well, we'll get into the cultural insensitivity, but you know what? One character I tell you I do like. I think Tinkerbell and her animation is definitely, as you said at the start of the podcast, brilliantly, Callum, is how the leaps and bounds of the Disney animation. You know, the glowing effect they have there and the sparkles and everything. It looks great, but what doesn't look great is how she like. It's such a weird character design as well, because the film sort of acknowledges it that she's sort of like not wearing a lot of clothes, if you get me. Like the film pans on it
Yeah.
to a quite uncomfortable amount that I don't think kids would have picked up on if you
Yeah,
didn't do that.
it's very bizarre because this is a kids' film, and Tinkerbell, we're not aware of the age of Tinkerbell, presumably because you don't age in Neverland. You know,
Hmm.
she's probably like, you know, hundreds of thousands of years old, but they are portraying her like as a sexy character, which is very weird in a kids' film. Like, you know, they like zoom in on her like on her, you know, pixie cleavage, and like, you know, she falls over, and
Yeah,
like you see like down her skirt, like it's bizarre.
it is.
And you know, it just there's a lot of portrayals of, you know, different cultures and of women and men reacting to women that this film sort of normalizes. And this may be like over analyzing it, but you know, just the sort of like acceptance for a lot of these views that would not be tolerated today. It's just kind of awkward to watch these days. And I don't know. Do you feel that like people overanalyze things, and you know, you know, because I think a lot of people would probably criticize us and say, you know, oh, it's of the times. You know, you need to like watch it with the perspective of what they would at the time. But it's really difficult to suspend that when you're just talking about basic human rights and respect.
That's a great point, Callum. And I think it's a really, it's like you said perfectly, buddy. It is. There's definitely a line between, like, when if people say, "Oh, you know, you need to respect it. You need to respect it because of the time." But then, you know, there's some like horrendous acts committed at the time that you have to criticize now. Otherwise, how is society going to move forward? Do you know what I mean, pal? You know, with the whole, I know, like we'll not get into a big political discussion about it now, but with the whole, you know, with the whole debate regarding, you know, Black Lives Matter and stuff, you know, if we don't scrutinize and analyze the roots of racism and slavery, you know, how are we ever going to move forward? So I think it's important to condemn those actions as well. And like this, I don't think it's a negative looking too much into it at all. You know, I think it's important to recognize how society has progressed and how we need to keep progressing. Although you don't want to plateau. So I think you're 100% right where you stand, buddy. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think if offensive portrayals and lack of respect for women and other cultures in kids' films is especially damaging, just because that's sort of, you know, affecting the young mind and molding people to be intolerant. And you know, obviously there are countless other factors to, you know, intolerance that people have, but I think sort of indoctrinating them into this sort of acceptance of things that aren't okay is definitely an issue. So you know, whilst it's, you know, fun to look back on this and, you know, to think about, you know, movies at the time, filmmaking, and, you know, sort of just joke about the plot of this film. You know, I don't think I'd ever show something like this to my kids unless they were adults and I was showing them to, you know, say that like this is what you shouldn't do. You know, I don't think the fun adventure, you know, part of this story is worth the potentially damaging views that it could like indoctrinate them into.
A great point, buddy, completely. And I think it's okay for Disney to show these depictions as long as as long as it's explicitly told and referred to that they're condemning them. You know what I mean? But in this film, it doesn't really
Yeah.
present that at all. It sort of seems like they're complicit.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think they make any effort to be critical of the views of especially the island natives, which we will
Mm.
definitely go on to because that maybe doesn't come up until about halfway through the film. But yeah, I think I don't think this film's critical of those thoughts or actions at all. I just need to fix my thing.
No worries, man. I'll
I'll
just
just
pause the
one sec.
record.
So we've sort of talked about the fact that we've sort of talked about the fact that Peter Pan is kind of a deeply problematic character, especially with his treatment of women.
Yeah.
And we will talk about that further. But then it's just so bizarre to me how they have portrayed Captain Hook as the villain of the film, even when the film itself tells us that the Peter Pan cut Captain Hook's hand off. With sort of my, you know, pop culture you know, assumptions that it's sort of formed me to have about this film, I assumed that the crocodile had just eaten his hand off,
Yeah.
not that Peter Pan had cut it off with a dagger and then thrown it to the crocodile.
It's
And
so
it's just my
brutal.
question: how is Peter Pan not the villain of this film?
I had the exact same point, Callum. It's so funny you mention that because I actually think Hook is the character, strangely, that brings the most charm and humor to the film. And I think he's probably one of my favorites in this. And the slapstick humor, we've criticized it before, but I think his slapstick with Mr. Is it Mr. Steam, Mr. Sleem?
Smee.
Smee, sorry, yes, Mr. Smee, and the crocodile, of course. That's some great slapstick there for me. And yeah, like Peter Pan, I'm just trying to think of a scenario where it would be okay for him to cut his hand off and feed it to wild animals. That sounds brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that they were having a fight, but I mean, with the character that were presented here, like the two characters compared to each other, you know, Captain Hook and Peter Pan. If you have the question of which one started that fight, I have to assume it was Peter Pan, and maybe it was
Yeah,
the Captain Hook was robbing a ship, and then Peter Pan decided to intervene. But I mean, you know, there's no justice system on in Neverland. You know, there's no judge, jury, executioner. You know, Peter Pan just acts without scrutiny. So I mean, I think you can still judge that, like judge each character. I mean, I wouldn't even judge each character equally. I think that, you know, cutting someone's hand off is a greater crime than robbing someone when you don't have a justice system that you're
it's a fair
expected
point.
to uphold. You know, there's no laws that Captain Hook has to abide by, which is sort of why I have like kind of a weird question, which is
Okay.
why is Captain Hook a pirate? Because this is sort of just an island surrounded by water in the stars. You know, like this is basically an alien planet, which is just an island and some water. So is it just for like shits and gigs? Because it's an empty island, like there's no sense of trade, and therefore there's no need for wealth. So why would he rob ships?
Yeah, it kind of feels like he got his hand cut off one day and thought, I mean, there are only people who can survive with only one hand are pirates. So I guess I better be cool and become a pirate. It's a weird one. And yeah, like you said, man, like Peter Pan does seem like the more villainous one, if you can call it that. He definitely, and
Yeah,
he's very reckless throughout the film. He nearly lets Tiger drown, and he's just a very reckless guy. And I suppose that's the childhood charm and the innocence of him. But likewise, I think the film kind of subverts that when they say, "Oh yeah, he cut some guy's hand off." Like you can't have both.
yeah, exactly. And I don't think if I were a child, like, you know, he's obviously a very old man, just, you know, in the appearance of a young boy. You know, he's presumably lived hundreds or thousands of years.
Mhm.
So, you know, none of his behavior is excusable by saying he's only lived a few short years, because he hasn't.
Sure.
But also, you know, even in my mind as like an 11 or 12-year-old, I wouldn't be like doing voices and laughing as one of my best friends was drowning to death.
Yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely. And like, I think the Peter Pan character it's one of those characters in the similar sense to Donald Duck that you wonder how has he become so popular and so beloved. Do you know?
Yeah, and I've definitely heard some like, you know, chagrin for the character of Peter Pan. You know, I've heard people criticize him before, but you know, I never expected it to be to the degree that I saw in this film. You know, like
Absolutely.
I've heard, you know, sort of softenings of all of the concepts of the problems with this film, but I've never heard someone, you know, deeply criticize it.
It's a great point, Callum. It's a great point, and you know, this film is it's such a weird one, man. It's such a weird one because I think there's so much great stuff in there, but it's sort of ruined by the lead character, the titular character. I think Captain Hook, and they did make a spin off of Hook, didn't they?
Well, there's multiple, you know, live action adaptations of the book, and animated adaptations. You know, there's one in the works right now. There's one called Pan, which is obviously that's sort of the origins of Captain Hook with Peter Pan. You know, and I guess it shows their like growing hatred whilst
Mhm.
they're fighting against Blackbeard. Then there's a film called Hook, which stars Dustin Hoffman as Captain Hook, but it's like Robin Williams as Peter Pan, so he's still really the star. So I don't really know why it's called Hook, because I feel like it still does focus on Peter Pan. But yeah, there's been like numerous adaptations, but I don't think Captain Hook has really been he hasn't really become his own character to the degree that he should have, except for in one place, which is actually Once Upon a Time, the TV
Okay.
show, where he sort of gets, you know, he has like a very tragic backstory, and then he's given, you know, a huge redemptive arc where he, you know, transitions from pirate to like leading man, and then he has like a romance with one of the biggest stars of the show. So
Mhm.
he sort of gets this whole redemptive arc, and you know, it brings in, you know, every adaptation of the character, all the backstories combined with that, and it makes the most compelling version of that character that I think has existed.
That's fantastic. That's fascinating, but buddy, and Yeah, I think it's a character that is a lot of potential there, and you know, I'd like to see more done with the character for sure, man, for sure.
Yeah, and you've talked about how visual wise, Tinkerbell is like an incredible looking character. We can sort of talk about how bad a person she is. We
Yeah,
see how incredibly jealous she is of how Peter acts with Wendy. But what does Tink do when Peter actually shows actual affection for someone? Because he doesn't even listen to Wendy, let alone show like infatuation or interest in her.
yeah,
So I mean, like like what lengths does Tinkerbell go to when he is actually flirting with someone? Like she
yeah.
literally tries to have Wendy murdered for just existing as a female.
I know it's sort of like begs the question, you know. Yeah, like you said, buddy, what would she do if Peter was actually interested in her romantically? You know, it sort of, you know, it seems like it could go further than like a limb cut off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's just bizarre to me that like probably they're probably like two of the most famous characters to come out of this story, and they're probably the biggest in pop culture. Like you have Captain Hook in pop culture, sure, but it's really Peter Pan and Tinkerbell,
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
and really they're both just like the most anti-feminist characters I've seen that
Absolutely.
well that like are still somehow redeemed by audiences, because obviously you have overtly anti-feminist characters in like movies and TV shows now, but that's being critical of that behavior.
Yeah.
Here it's like seen as endearing, that like, oh, Tinkerbell is being cute trying to have a woman murdered because she's a woman.
Yeah.
I just don't understand how that could
Misses the
ever have been
mark.
excused by audiences.
It misses the mark completely, buddy.
Yeah, it's just so weird to
It
me.
is weird.
Like we'll talk about it at the end, but we have to get into sort of the really problematic side of this story. And I feel like we've talked through it a lot, but I feel like it would be remiss to not like drill deep into
Yeah.
it, because we have to recognize that there are huge problems with this film. Before we say that we either like it or don't like it, we need
Sure.
to talk it out.
Sure.
And there's basically a plot by the kids to hunt and capture native islanders in Neverland, and the film really doesn't seem to be criticizing this behavior. The Lost Boys, declare that the whole thing's been a game, and they do a game where they hunt after the native islanders, and then the native islanders hunt after them, and they release each other, and it's a bit of a farce, a bit of a joke. But Michael and John don't know that, so they're sort of like marching these kids into battle, believing that they have the right to capture these innocent people that have just populated the island all their lives, when the Lost Boys and themselves have just come to colonize it. And like we've watched Hamilton, and I feel like even there are certain issues with that people are criticizing currently, with like a positive portrayal of people who dealt with slave ownership. Uh, that was sort of one side of that story that film didn't really cover. But I feel like the colonialism presented in that film, their sort of need to revolt against the British, who were like taking their land and declaring it, as their own. That's sort of very apparent here. And those themes, I think, in Hamilton opened my eyes to seeing this more in films, and how huge problem that is. That these people are just trying to live their lives, and then these people who have come and decided that they live here now, and decided that they deserve this land, but have actual no claim to it. It's difficult to watch, honestly.
You know, man, I agree completely, Calvin. You know, you're one thing you're so good at, man, is like going into a specific point and really delving deep and analyzing a film. You know, you're so good at that, and I think you've nailed it there, buddy. And I agree completely. And it's one of those things, like we were a bit shocked that this hasn't been brought to our attention sooner. And I think, you know, I don't think I can say anything that could top what you've said, man. I think you've absolutely smashed it there. And I agree. And you know what? You know, like you said, the film doesn't go far enough to scrutinize that. And I think that's the thing we can condemn it for. And, you know, maybe that's due to the views at the time of Disney execs and stuff. You know, it remains to be seen. But it's such a strange thing to include in a kids fantasy adventure film. Like, you know, colonial, I can't say that, colonialism, and, you know, just how mistreated certain, you know, backgrounds are, and people of certain backgrounds, and it's ridiculous. And it's sort of in a similar sense to Dumbo. Like, I don't want to get like too critical of the film, because there is some good stuff in there, but I think on this point you've smashed it, and I think we can be critical of it.
Well, thank you, sir, for your kind
Yeah,
words.
no worries.
And
Being truthful.
yeah, I feel like you know it is a kids film, but it is problematic, and I think we do need to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we were able to hash that out. And you sort of said that you wanted to mention the problematic side of like Peter taking on that sort of you
Mhm.
know like did you have a point on Peter sort of
I sort of-
like appropriating that culture?
Yeah, because it sort of feels like Peter, when he assumes sort of the headpiece of the American Indian community, it sort of seems like he's triumphantly mocking it in a sense, and that just felt very distasteful in my opinion. What about yourself?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you because he's, like he has definitely appropriated their culture because, we don't know the origin of Peter Pan, in this universe. He may have, come to Neverland as a human. He may have been born there, so he may be a native islander. We don't know, but uh he has certainly, taken their tribal roots, and he's called himself Big Chief and put on one of their tribe's headdresses. And yeah, as you said perfectly, it does just come across as incredibly distasteful. I mean, sort of they have welcomed him into the community, so I don't know that it's necessarily racist, because they have said, oh, you're a big chief now, but obviously the film has decided to let that
Yeah,
storyline happen. That
yeah,
wouldn't actually happen in real life. No one would, say like, oh, thank you, white savior, be a part of our
yeah,
tribe.
yeah,
Here's a
yeah.
headdress, big chief. Like it's ridiculous, and
Absolutely.
it is in very very poor taste, I think.
Completely, buddy. You smashed it again, and I actually strangely don't have a lot of points about this film. And well, I suppose one question I wanted to ask you, here in the Movie Mates channel, we often find ourselves identifying a lot with certain side characters in a lot of movies, and I wanted to know, in this movie, who is the side character that you like the most? Because for me, I quite enjoyed the crocodile characters, strangely.
Yeah, I mean, I would have appreciated, any character who murdered Peter Pan. I was desperate for that bomb to like obliterate that
Yeah,
little shit, honestly.
yeah.
Uh,
I suppose Hook
but
would.
yeah, I would say pretty much the only character that isn't sexist or racist at any point is Wendy. She
Yeah,
seems to,
yeah,
she's a very maternal figure. She tells great in-depth stories. She puts up with people's shit, but I suppose then she's also tolerant when, they say offensive things. But I suppose to her at that time that wasn't offensive, which was obviously, an oversight in morality. But
yeah.
she seems to be the only person who isn't actively racist or sexist in this film. So I guess I'm gonna have to go with Wendy as my favorite
Love it,
character.
man. Love it. Any more remarks from you, buddy?
Just a few. I'm really glad that they didn't take the Wendy and Peter relationship to a romantic place,
Me too.
because I for some reason had this assumption that that was always a thing. Because it
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
just be from the initial scene that they meet where she's like, "Oh, can I give you a kiss?" and he says, "What's a kiss?" and she describes it. But in my mind, they always did take it to a romantic place, but that's not here at all, and I'm very thankful for that because he's
yeah.
presumably an old ass man.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's kind of like a Freddy and Daphne from Scooby-Doo, where it's like a will they, won't they kind of dynamic. I know that's a very weird comparison to make, but I don't know if you get me on that one, but it's sort of similar to that, reminding me of that. And I'm sort of glad that didn't pursue that just because I fear Wendy's safety from Tinkerbell.
Yeah, definitely from being murdered by Tinkerbell, but also, Peter Pan like pulling this shit like, "Oh, I'm but a boy," but I'm like, nah. One, you're probably an alien, and
Yeah,
two, you're probably like 1,000 years old.
yeah,
So,
both.
he's definitely. Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna get like I had this very weird question to ask you. Like, can I ask you? And if
No,
it's
go
too
for it.
weird, you can cut it out.
No, go for
You
it.
know, technically in a film, if you have sex with an alien, which he is, because like we have to assume because it doesn't actually give us a definitive answer that
Yeah,
he's from Neverland and then visits Earth to bring people to Neverland. So he's technically an alien. If an alien has sex with a human, is that like obviously there's some cross species business there? Is that bestiality? Because
that's
it's
a
sort of
good point.
having sex with like a sentient
So
animal that isn't a human.
that's a good point because
It's a very weird question,
here's the worst question. I'm
but
gonna I'm gonna add
I don't
that to
know.
the channel to the episode description. But but
Well, I don't know. Like, I feel like we've seen a lot of films where, like, oh, there's, someone from beyond the stars who comes and, romances, like, this innocent woman. Like, we
Guardians
see
of the
that in sort of
Galaxy
like
too.
Guardians of the Galaxy
Yeah.
and,
Thor.
yeah, Thor, plenty of other things where this alien comes in the form of a human and has sex with a human woman. Uh, but yeah, there's definitely some like weird cross species stuff that defies the laws of nature there.
That's an interesting
That
one. I get it.
I'm not really in support of, honestly.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because, like, yeah, because they've had that debate in the MCU, haven't they? Whereas is Thor and the Asgardians, are they an alien race, or are they gods, or are they humans? Like, it's a really weird one, and I don't know the answer to that one, to tell you the truth. But no, it is a weird one because it's it's yeah. I don't know if it's bestiality, but it's certainly under that sort of.
It's such a weird
It is
question.
a
I'm
weird one,
sorry,
isn't it?
but yeah, I would say in the MCU, they sort of say that like magic is just science that we don't understand yet.
Yeah.
So he's definitely an alien from an alien species, certainly. So it is very odd for him to come and romance a human woman, especially because she's thinking of him as sort of like a traveler from far away. There's that romantic element in like the human's head, but I mean the alien knows what they're doing because they know that they're in a new planet, and to sort of romance the locals is odd, certainly.
Certainly, buddy. Certainly. On the Movie Mates channel, we like to get into the big hitters, the big discussions, and I think there's no bigger one
Callum likes to
than
ask fucked questions.
that. Yeah. Any final points from you?
Well, basically, just in summation, I expected to like this film, and I certainly enjoyed it, but I don't think that I can say I liked it due to the cultural depictions, cultural appropriation, and assertion that like Peter is the hero of the film, despite being like a bloodthirsty chauvinist pig.
That's a great point. And I think on that note, man, like I'd have to agree. This film works as a very good fantasy film, but I don't think it fully understands its characters, which is very unusual for Disney because we've talked about before, like Cinderella, and Snow White. They understand the characters there, but in this film, it sort of seems confused and muddled. And I think that's definitely a criticism there for Peter Pan. And you know, even just saying Peter Pan, it's a very strange name. It sort of feels like one name. Like, do you know what I mean? Like Pan, is that his surname,
Yeah,
or what's going on?
I guess. I think in like Pan, the film that came out in 2015, they sort of established that he is a human child, like from an orphanage, and he's pretty much just like brought as like the equivalent of a lost boy. Like he's just one random kid that happened to go to Neverland, so he is actually a human child in that interpretation. But I think here we have to assume that he's just like an alien cretin.
It's a great point. That's a great way. That's a great one, man. Have you got anything else, or do you want to hop into ratings then, buddy?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult to rate, I think. You know,
I
because
think
it,
so.
it, it it is difficult. I think if you pretty much took out if you took out all of the cultural depictions and the cultural appropriation and the racism within the film, if you took out all of those scenes and then left in the film left in the scenes in which characters are sexist or chauvinistic, I think we could criticize those characters, because that's maybe only two or three of the characters that you go, oh, there are these good characters who aren't that way, and then there are these characters that we can criticize that are sexist. But it seems that every character in the film is racist,
Yeah.
and so that leaves us with like pretty much no options of characters to admire. Half of the cast of this film is meant to be the protagonists. All of the children and Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, they're meant to be the protagonists of the film. But then almost every aspect of their personality is uh intolerant, or at least offensive,
Yeah.
because I mean they don't seem to actively dislike the native islanders, but they treat them with a lack of cultural respect.
Mm.
And the portrayal of the characters of the film is offensive, but maybe the characters aren't racist in themselves, but the film is. Uh, so I feel like there are certain elements that you can definitely criticize even beyond the racism, but there are elements even beyond that that you can enjoy. So there is some enjoyment to be gleaned. So if you balance the quality of the animation, the parts of it that you can accept, as being of a good quality, it's difficult to say, honestly, because I think any rating is going to be generous, probably, because then it should be so outweighed by the fact that it's so incredibly offensive
Mm.
in many regards, especially because they're portraying the offensive character, like the characters who act intolerantly as the protagonist. It's painful,
Weird
honestly,
one.
to try
The
and
hard
rate this
one.
film.
Hard one.
I'd probably go with a 6, but I
Yeah.
feel like that's too generous. But I feel like overall there were elements that I enjoyed, but I can't say that I liked it, as I said, just because of the many offensive shades of the film.
You know what, brother? I think you've absolutely smashed it there, and I have to agree with you. It's probably one of the hardest films we've had to rate, and I think this, as I've said, I think this film works really well as a fantasy film. But one thing we haven't really mentioned, in my opinion, this film isn't exactly groundbreaking in the same sort of sense that Cinderella was, or Alice in Wonderland was, or Snow White was, or anything like that. This film feels very, it feels very, you know nothing. I nothing this film. It's not a film that I will remember for watching. I'll certainly remember the bad bits of it and the culturally insensitive parts of it, and that's definitely not where I think this film is trying to go. But don't get me wrong, I think there's some fantastic things in this film. I think the character of Wendy, as you mentioned, is probably the standout here. And I think there's some really great like slapstick humor in there, probably the best we've seen so far, in my opinion. I think the villain in this film, if you can call him that, is stellar. Hook's great. But that being said, Peter Pan, probably the most disappointing and underwhelming protagonist, if you can even call him that, for me in the entire Disney franchise so far. So for that, I'd probably give it a 7.
Yeah, like
It's a
I just feel
disappointing
bad even
film.
rating it as high as a 6 because I feel bad. Like I did enjoy elements of it. Like my experience was marred by the parts that I found offensive to different cultures.
Yeah.
So the experience was certainly the film took a shit on my watching experience.
Mhm.
But there were certain story elements that were still there that I appreciated. So I guess I'll leave it at a 6 and move on and hope that our points just support the fact that we are not in support of many of the elements within the film.
Absolutely, man. I suppose it's now time to move on to a less controversial film, shall we say, Lady and the Tramp.
Yes, yes. I once again don't have much to say about this film because I feel like it is quite uneventful. I would say it's the least eventful of the four that we're discussing today.
Probably the most
But
comedy, isn't it?
you may have a different take on that.
Yeah. Well, you know what, man? This is probably the film I was looking, and this is a weird thing to say, but especially in the 4 films that we're talking about, but this is probably the film I was looking forward to seeing the most, because we've mentioned before about like romantic comedies, and I think this is probably the closest to a rom com that we've seen so far, in the sense that it's boy meets girl, or rather dog meets dog, in the sense, and I think it's a very sweet film. And I'd have to give
Yeah,
Disney massive credit. This film is predominantly female orientated. We've got another female protagonist today, and I think Lady is absolutely phenomenal. Her characterization, she's such a complex character, and I feel ridiculous saying that about a dog, but it is true. Like, she's such a
yeah.
complex character, and I even think that the character of Tramp, I even feel bad for calling him Tramp because he's such a nice guy, he's such a nice dog. It's This film's such a special film to me, and it's such a weird one. This is my first viewing, and I don't know.
Yeah, and it is again also my first viewing of the film, and it did take me aback, and it surprised me just because of I guess Peter Pan gave me low expectations of the Disney films of the time. So I was very surprised to see that sort of Tramp is like a side character in Lady's story rather than a
Yeah,
balance or the other way
completely.
around. And I really appreciated that because we need some strong female characters. Whereas we will talk a little bit later on when I think she acts a bit irrationally. Uh,
Sure, sure.
and I feel like that was maybe uh, male executives at the time being like, oh, and this is how a woman would act. I
Yeah,
feel like there probably
yeah.
weren't a lot of
I get you.
female voices to say how a woman would act in certain situations.
Absolutely, buddy. And one thing about this film that I think is really, really fantastic is the sound mixing and the editing, because and especially the animation as well, because I think in terms of the voice work, Disney's always very good at making sure you get a sense of each character's personality, and here is no different. And for me, especially one thing I noticed, when Trump is like stretching, washing, and drying himself, it is so realistic. We see dogs do it all the time, like Ollie, Ollie, and he does that all the time. Like, he does exactly the same movements, and it's clear that they've put a lot of effort into making sure it's a like for like representation of how actual animals act. And I thought it was absolutely
Yeah,
fantastic, man. And even the dog noises in here, I assume they're actual dog noises, so it was fantastic to see.
Yeah, and Disney does have a habit of sort of like bringing animals into the recording studio to sort of observe how they act. They did that. They watched elephants for Dumbo and they watched
Yeah.
lions for The Lion King, and so a lot of the movements are incredibly realistic. So I definitely have to give them respect for that because I assume that was the technique that they used here to be so accurate.
Mm.
And we can talk about sort of dog possession right now because the film opens with sort of Jim Deere, as he's called in the film, sort of being very reluctant to show a lot of compassion towards Lady, and I don't really know what you're buying a dog for if not for love and companionship, because
Absolutely.
like clearly Jim, he clearly quickly warms to Lady, even a few hours after she's barking and yapping and wanting to be part of their lives and stay in their bed. So he does clearly warm to her, but I think she deserves she deserved better owners from the beginning.
I agree completely, Callum. You've nailed it there, and I think this film, in a sense, in a different sense to how we've analyzed Peter Pan, I think this film does generally quite well like criticize its sort of metaphorical class division in the sense that Lady comes from a well-off background, very very comfortable lifestyle. She, do you know what I mean? And then whereas Tramp, I suppose by the namesake, Tramp, he's not exactly on Lady's class level, if you know what I mean. Like he doesn't have a home, he's not well looked after, which is sad to see. And it's quite unusual in the sense that I think the film is actually quite critical of that, to be fair to Disney. We see Tramp, stand up for his roots and stand up for himself, and he's comfortable for being who he is rather than placate the facade of Lady being owned by humans, which I think makes him quite empowering. And I think this film is a great metaphor for like the class division, how it criticizes that. I don't know if you got the same. Like, do you think it criticized it enough or not?
Well, there's sort of the line of the fact that they show Lady and even as they say, money doesn't buy you happiness. She's in like an incredibly higher upper class home. She has rich owners. Clearly, she lives in a gated community, so clearly she's well looked after. But that doesn't equal love. But Trump has found love and friendship and food. Whilst by being resourceful and responsible for himself. So in that way, I think there's sort of talking being critical of just being comfortable with your privilege. But then at the end of the film,
Yeah,
when they
I was about to say.
welcome Tramp into the
Yeah,
family, they're sort of saying
subverting it.
that sort of like like it sort of ignores his journey, where it probably would have been more fitting for Lady to join him so he could show her the ways of becoming independent. I mean, I suppose that would also adhere to the idea of like, oh, a man needs to show the woman her way in life, so that would have maybe come across as a bit sexist. But I think it would be more true to the message of the film, which is class isn't important. You don't need to
Mhm.
be a certain class to impress someone. And
Yeah,
then
man.
I feel like they failed themselves by just having him
Yeah, I
join the rich
agree.
family and become that person.
I agree. And I love when the two like romantic partners end up together. But in this film, I wouldn't have been entirely disappointed if it's a bittersweet moment where Lady and Tramp don't end up together. I think that could have probably worked for both characters' story, where Tramp realizes that he's more than just like a scruffy dog. Like he has love and he has people around him. Whereas Lady realizes that, like you said, money can't buy happiness. So I think that would have been a good sort of midpoint there. And I really do admire Tramp's. I really don't like calling him Tramp because it feels really distasteful to the character. Like it seems really offensive. I don't like calling Tramp like Tramp, and obviously I really do admire like his nomadic lifestyle, and I think that's probably down to Larry Roberts' voice work, because to me he really sounds like David Spade. I don't know if you got that.
Yeah, I think I did. Like I was certainly comparing him to other like modern actors, and yeah, I think maybe David Spade did come across.
Yeah, and it's sort of like the high pitched sort of comedic voice. And I was doing some Googling the other day, buddy, and The Emperor's New Groove is one of my favorites. And I didn't know David Spade is Cusco in that. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, that's great. I'm so looking forward to watching that because that's my
Oh,
brother's favorite film. So I'm
that's
really
your
looking forward
favorite
to
film?
watching it. It's my brother's favorite
Is it?
film, and I've never seen it.
It's my
Yeah,
favorite Disney film. That's your brother's favorite film.
yeah.
I didn't know that. That's great. That's so good, man. I think you'll love it.
like I'm aware of like the cultural references of Eartha Kitt saying like pull the lever crunk. Like I'm aware of that, but I don't think I've committed to watching it start to finish.
I love it. So good, man. So good. But yeah, any points from you, man? I'm just happy to go by whatever you have to say.
Well, we sort of talked about the idea of Lady potentially like joining Tramp on the road,
Mhm.
and they pitch that as a potential idea, and then say, oh no, that wouldn't work because Lady said who'd watch the baby? Maybe it's parents, and
Yeah.
uh, and if it's the parents that the baby needs protected from, you're certainly not going to be able to do anything about it. Not to be derogatory or patronizing. You're a dog. Like
I
if
get you.
two
I get
adults
you.
decide that they don't want you interfering with their business with their baby, that they can put you in a different home.
It's a great point, buddy. And this movie may as well be called like Misjudged the movie, because that is literally every plot point in this movie occurs because someone has misjudged someone. Tramp gets misjudged as like a stray dog who needs to be put in the pound. Lady gets misjudged by I think it's the kid's aunt for being like a very aggressive dog who like smashes the vase and stuff. And obviously, we see that at the end, like Tramp gets misjudged because people think, oh no, he attacked the baby, but it ends up he was going after a rat, which it's I do think you're right, man. Like the whole like who's looking after the baby idea. It should be the parents.
Yeah, and if not the parents, I mean, you still won't be able to do anything about that if the parents
Yeah,
aren't taking care of the baby.
yeah, exactly, man, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that for the most part of the film, Lady seemed very composed, and she seemed very rational.
Yeah,
But then when she's taken to the pound and returns home, Tramp tries to come and speak to her, and she's angry because Tramp has had girlfriends before her, which she finds out in the pound, and she blames him for being taken away and taken to the pound. First of all, one is not none of her business, and the
yeah,
second is not his fault. If he's had girlfriends before, dogs, a dog's lifespan, works 7 times faster than humans. So he's presumably, in his, later years, or at least middle age, roughly. So how is it unreasonable that he's had, multiple girlfriends,
yeah,
and also you getting like taken by a dog snatcher when all that Trump's been trying to do is help you? If like you blaming him is
yeah.
like really, it's really offensive towards Trump, because I mean he's tried his best, and that's where I think it was probably. I feel like the male voices of Disney probably outweighed the female voices, and they said, no, 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 this is how women would act. Like I think this
Exactly.
this film is a film about a woman that's probably told,
By men.
like from a guy's idea of what a woman's voice and
That's such a good point,
rationale would
man.
be,
That's such a
and
good
I
point.
just I just don't think it doesn't come off as authentic, does it at all, really?
It doesn't at all, man. It really doesn't, and it's such a great point again, man. And it's something that I think Hollywood's definitely still guilty of today, to a certain extent, And what one thing about the film is that, like, I think the film's message is so good up until the final third, where we said, of course, like the film subverts the lifestyle that Trump normally would lead, as he ends up with Lady and her family. So it's a strange one, man. And this film is very strange because one thing, and I don't know if I missed this when I was like glancing down on my phone or something, or looking, making notes, whatever I was probably doing. And like, the classic scene in this film that everyone I suppose recalls is the spaghetti scene when Lady and Tramp are eating spaghetti and they kiss. But I actually didn't notice in this film they actually kiss. They just eat from the same bowl of spaghetti. Is that right, or have I missed it?
No, there's a moment where their lips meet and they sort of like recoil and then like have a wee smile.
Ah,
So
I
it
missed it
is
then.
there.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are quite a few iconic moments in this film. But what isn't iconic is the last quarter of this film. And I'll be honest, I have no fucking clue what happened. Like I had to Wikipedia what happened, because
Yeah.
I just did not understand from the visual storytelling.
It's messy.
The like
It's messy.
yeah, as you said, like the message is muddled, with Tramp and Lady, and also I just had no idea what was happening.
Yeah.
I pretty much did just think he was attacking the baby, but also how
That's
is putting the baby in danger worth catching a mouse,
that's the thing.
or a rat?
I had seen this, like, even though we know, even though the audience, we the audience know that Tramp didn't attack the baby, like, why does everyone believe that the discovery of a rat proves his innocence? Technically, he knocked the baby
Yeah,
over still. It's still his fault.
yeah. But also, yeah, it proves that he didn't intentionally knock the baby over, but it still proves that he trashed the house for no reason. I mean, saying
Yeah.
like, oh, the dog ran around, trashed the house, knocked over the baby.
That's welcome
Oh,
into our
but
home.
who cares because they were catching a rat? That's what they do. And I'm like, well, it's still nonsensical. You can still criticize him for that. And yeah, I just didn't understand any of the motivation to do with that really.
Yeah, it's a great point, man. It's a great point, and one thing I really disliked about the movie, and it's such a nitpick, but having ladies litter look exactly like her and Tramp, and not like a mix of the two. It felt like it screams lazy animation to me. It feels like they were like rushing this
Yeah,
out and thought we can't hand draw like individual puppies. We'll just draw them exactly this. Or like have a miniature version of Tramp and
yeah.
Lady. Is that it felt lazy to me. I was like, come on.
It did. Yeah, that definitely screamed to me. And I suppose we'll see how that's continued in Lady and the Tramp 2. I believe it's called like Scamp's Adventure or some shit. Like it's gonna
Oh
be
yes,
bad.
yeah.
I've heard it's shit. Because have you seen it? I feel like I have like very vague memories of maybe seeing some of it on VHS. But apparently, it's like their son wants to be like a wild dog, so he runs away from home. But it
I've
sounds
heard
shit.
of it. Yeah, and they made a live action one of these, didn't they, in Disney Plus? And I was scrolling through Disney Plus yesterday, and I saw the thumbnail for that, and the dogs look pretty great. Like they look exactly how I'd imagine them. Have you seen it? Or I know you mentioned there was a little bit of backlash behind it.
Oh, the reaction from it initially. I don't know what the reaction was to the quality of the film, but certainly its announcement and the trailer, it was met with very harsh criticism because they had used like they had used dogs that hadn't been adopted to sort of act as like the reference and to do some of the like motion and stuff.
Mhm.
But then they sort of like horribly animate the face of them to speak, especially Tramp. The CGI on his face is quite unconvincing, and yeah, it comes across as probably the least original live action adaptation because I feel like they still managed to add some depth to say Cinderella or Aladdin. I think with the
Yeah,
extra like 30 to 40 minutes of screen time, they were able to delve deeper into the characters. But
yeah.
from what I can tell, it's just a needless extension of the same story.
Yeah, man, and it's so interesting you mentioned like live action dogs. Do you remember like there was a craze in like the late 2010? No, sorry, like in the early 2010s, late 2000s, where it was really popular to have like a movie about like talking dogs or dogs. Because I remember there was a run where it was like Hotel for Dogs, Underdog, and like Marmaduke. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and there's those whole franchises called like Air Buddies and like
Yeah,
Snow Paw
yeah.
or like I don't remember the title of it, but it was like Santa. Yeah, it was Santa Paws, where like it
Yeah,
would be like there were like 8 films in this franchise, and like some of them were the dogs acting as like Santa's helpers. Like
that
they
was a
seemed like
big thing
absolute
back then.
garbage though.
That was a big thing back then.
Yeah,
Like
they
I'm
seem
actually,
like shit.
have you ever seen Underdog?
I've seen the Underdog, I believe, and I didn't. I don't remember finding it too bad. It
It's
kind
not
of
too
seemed
bad.
like
Yeah,
I think mentally I'd probably compare it to like an Alvin and the Chipmunks.
yeah,
It seems like that level of annoyance probably,
yeah. I think
where
it's
it's
very
like the
noticeable.
quality of the CGI isn't too bad, but
Yeah.
the storyline's probably quite tedious.
Yeah, like it's not bad to be fair. Like it's not too bad, but like yeah, that was a big thing back then, wasn't it? To have like dog movies about talking dogs or just like dogs, and then wasn't it? Because like yeah, then you had like Marley and Me and stuff like that. So it was weird.
Yeah, I never really got the craze. I've never really. I find it more difficult to empathize with characters that aren't human.
Mhm.
I suppose even humanoid like aliens I can empathize with, but whenever we watch these Disney films that have sort of animals starring in them, I do kind of find it harder to relate.
I get you, man. Completely, completely. Have you got any other points, buddy?
No, there's nothing more for me. Have you got anything else?
Nothing for me, but I'd love to hear your rating, dude.
So I would say that this is one of the first Disney films where, I didn't love it, but I genuinely had no criticisms of it. There's
Mhm.
nothing offensive or, you know, like genuinely baffling. There was some maybe, questionable character decisions, as we said.
Yeah.
But aside from that, it I think it once again shows the progression of quality of the Disney films, and I think it's probably one of the best ones that we've discussed to date. And I really enjoyed like the sort of whirlwind romance because it still seemed believable that sort of these two opposites would attract. Although I agree with you that maybe a more realistic ending where they don't end up together maybe would have played better. No, not necessarily for kids, but I think for future generations who look back on it, that ending may have added more realism.
Mhm.
So sort of with the muddled message and sort of those things in mind, I'd give it an 8.
That's great, buddy. I love that. And I'd have to agree with you, man. It's definitely one of the more solid films we've reviewed where there's no gaping criticisms. I think this film's fantastic, and in a sort of like a rom-com inspired story. I love that. So for me, I'd have to give it a 9. I thought Lady and Tramp were especially compelling. I actually really enjoyed Tramp, and I thought his nomadic lifestyle I thought was really great. Yeah, well done. And speaking of rom-coms, like I recently watched yeah, it's a Chris Evans rom-com, Playing It Cool. Have you seen it?
I don't think so, but I may have done. Could you give me a rough
It's a,
plot rundown?
it's like him and Michelle Monaghan, and he's like a screenwriter who wants to do an action movie and he's with Anthony Mackie, but Anthony Mackie wants him to do a rom-com first, so he does the rom-com and then falls in love with this girl. But also like Topher Grace is like his best friend. Like Topher Grace is fantastic in this. No, honestly, Topher Grace, I know you love him from that 70s show, Spider-Man 3. Obviously, he's so good in this, and it's weird because it's got such a good Chris Evans, Michelle Monaghan, Johan Griffith, Topher Grace, Aubrey Plaza, Anthony Mackie. This film is full of top. It's so good, man. It's so good.
Where did you see this film?
Oh, I bought it on DVD. I bought it on DVD. I'm building up the Chris Evans collection. I've got every Chris Evans movie I think since 2005.
Yeah, weird question. Like, so someone had asked me today, who my favorite like actor and actress of the 21st century were, and
Ooh,
I was taken aback, and I had no idea what to say.
yeah,
And I think if I really had to drill down and pick, it would probably just be Rachel McAdams and Donald Gleason from
love
About
that.
Time, because
Love
I
that.
think that not only did they make the perfect romantic pair in About Time, but I think in separate projects, neither has had a miss really that I've seen.
That's such a good.
I didn't love The Notebook, but I don't think that's to the blame of Rachel McAdams. I think it was maybe just a bit too forlorn and dramatic for me.
Yeah.
But I would have to say that they're probably my two favorites. Where would you be steering towards?
I would say for best, my favorite actor, I would say Joseph Gordon-Levitt or Chris Evans. Favorite actress, I would say, uh, this is gonna be a weird. I really like Zazie Beetz as an actress. I think she's,
Fair
I
shout,
think
yeah.
she's great. Zazie Beetz or I'm trying to think movies here. I sorry, yeah, Zazie Beetz. I really like Amy Adams. I think she's fantastic.
Oh yeah,
One of
definitely.
my
She's
favorites.
great.
One of my
Do
favorites.
do you like Zazie Beat from anything other than like Deadpool 2 and Joker, or is that really where you think she's shone?
I think she's really shot because I remember she got a lot of criticism and hate for Domino, but she's my favorite character in Deadpool 2 by far, and I think she's fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
And like, I did see, what did I see her in something else? What film is she in? Because I've definitely seen her in something else, but I can't put a finger on it.
Yeah, I feel like I've definitely seen her in other things, but it was maybe before I knew of like her, as an actress. She was maybe in a bit part in a film I'd seen before, and I just didn't take note. But I'm sure I've seen her in something else.
Here's a question for you. Well, here's two questions, right? What is the best film you've watched recently, and who do you think is the most overrated actor or actress in the 21st century? Go for it.
Ooh. Uh, well, I have to say the best film that I've seen of late, as in the last few months, would have to be The Graduate, because that just jumped instantly into my top 10 films. That and Back to the Future, because I would say Back to the
Good
Future
shout.
probably hit like top three, but The Graduate was probably number five. But they're both incredible films that I never expected to like to the degree that I did. I
Great shout.
expected them to be cultural phenomenons, cultural phenomenons that I just took no interest in, especially when I go back and watch old films. I never expected to enjoy a film from the 60s. That just wasn't on my mind that would happen.
Uh-huh.
The oldest film before that I'd seen that I enjoyed was probably it was probably the king of comedy. So I was sort of very surprised to go back to 1967 and
Yeah,
enjoy a film.
yeah.
So those are probably the best of late. And overrated actress, I have to say Julia Roberts, but she's not really.
What about
I mean,
acting in general?
she probably. I mean, Julia Roberts probably made her career more in the 20th century rather than the 21st century.
Yeah.
But 21st century actor that's overrated. Ooh, uh,
I'm gonna have a look at some films here just to see, because, like, to be fair, I don't think we dislike a lot of actors. We might dislike a few characters that they've played, but I think generally we quite like a lot of actors. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there's certain actors that are just constantly cast in projects, and you're sort of baffled as to why, because you're like, oh, well, I mean, they did this, dramatic disaster, the
Yeah,
last film they did, and then they just keep being cast, and that's happened with some of my favorite actors. Like Ryan Gosling is probably one of my favorite male actors, and he's had some of the biggest disasters in Hollywood.
I
I
think I've
mean,
got
are
mine.
you aware of the career of Ryan Gosling?
See, you know, it's strange because, like we've said, I'm not aware of his career massively, but my favorite performance of his is Lars and the Real Girl. Like, what can you shed some light on his career? What's it been like?
Well, like this is pretty much his trajectory. He pretty much has like two successful films, and then he's like riding high, and he's thinking I'm a movie star, and then his confidence is built, and then he has one huge disaster, and then he retires from acting, and then he gets like two or three more films that are great, then a huge disaster. So there was an instance where like he did like a couple of films. There was one disaster. He retired from acting, and
Uh-huh.
then he decided to become a director, and he directed a film that was called The Lost River, and it was it's been deemed like one of the worst films of all time. Like it was a complete disaster. It's the
Yeah.
only film he's ever directed, I believe. He didn't star in it, but he was responsible for directing it. And then a few years later, he was like, okay, I'm back to acting. And then there were a few misses like Gangster Squad that just really dropped his confidence. And
Mhm.
I think he's one of the most talented actors working today. He just needs probably a better agent to pick projects for him, because he has the talent with like Lars and the Real Girl.
Absolutely, man. And I'm trying to think overrated actors. I think I've got mine, and this is probably, if anyone's listening to this point, I might get a lot of shit for this, but I don't think Chris Hemsworth is the most diverse actor I've ever seen. I think it's very much every role of his is the same. We've seen with Thor, especially. I think that character's been in a whirlwind of a character development that doesn't necessarily make sense, and that's probably partly down to the different directors, so I'll not criticize him in that. But Men in Black International, I've been very critical of that film here on the channel. Not a huge fan of that. And even from what I've seen in the 2016 Ghostbusters, it just seems like Chris Hemsworth playing Chris Hemsworth. He seems like a lovely guy, but it's just I'm not a fan of his acting style or his humor really. But he seems like a great guy, so I'm not going to be too critical. And
Yeah.
I love him in interviews, especially in the Graham Norton show. I'm a huge fan of him there.
Yeah, I would say that his most different role is probably Ghostbusters, and in my opinion, he was the best part of that film. Like I thought that showed his comedic chops, which is probably what
Mm-hmm.
inspired them to like infuse the humor into Thor,
Mm-hmm.
because that was something that we hadn't seen before.
Yeah,
So I get you that he does seem often typecast as sort of the stoic hero. Kind of like what the character he plays in like Extraction is kind of just similar to how he played in the first few Thor films, and then sort of how he plays in Ragnarok and following is how he was in Ghostbusters. So
yeah,
he maybe only has two modes. I'd maybe like to see him in like a romantic comedy.
absolutely.
That might be a way to like freshen up how we see him, because I think he could definitely prove that he has that charm.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Like, it's a really interesting question. Like, I hope we get into more of these sort of things in our episode 50 of the podcast, because I actually really like talking about so many actors. Some of my favorite actors, like, I haven't even talked about. Like, it's just there's so many great ones out there. It's hard to like pinpoint. It's hard to pinpoint one. Like, I love Owen Wilson and stuff. A lot of his films. So there's so many, isn't there, man? I'm sure there's loads that you can name as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope that if you want to leave comments below in our 50th episode suggestion
Yes,
episode,
that'll be out by now.
we'd love to hear from you guys, because I mean we have plenty of answers, so we just need questions.
Absolutely, buddy. So I suppose that leaves us to move on to our fourth and final film of today.
Yeah, this has probably been the longest stretch on a Disney episode so far,
I'm
and
enjoying it.
I've really enjoyed
I'm
speaking to you
enjoying it.
today. Yeah.
Absolutely, man.
So what the episode sorry the film today that we're talking about last is Sleeping Beauty. Would you say that this is probably the most famous of the four that we're talking about today?
I would definitely say so. And then it's sort of like a Snow White 2.0, isn't it? And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's weird because we've sort of discussed about, you know, our potentially siding with the villain, not necessarily siding with the villains, but preferring the villains in these films. And I think the evil queen in this is absolutely magnificent. And I don't know if you got this, but her entrance and her overall aura, it kind of reminded me of Hela from Thor Ragnarok. And I think she's the best Disney villain so far. I think she's incredible.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I don't understand her character motivation. You know, the Angelina Jolie made two films about
Yeah,
Maleficent that
yeah,
delved into her backstory, so it
yeah.
added context to why the character hates the king or is offended that she's not invited to this situation. But here, you know, it doesn't flesh out the character of her enough to for us to
Good
sympathize
point.
or understand her motives.
Great
So
point.
yeah, whilst I would say she's probably my favorite character in the film and I enjoyed her the most, we definitely don't side with her. You know, we're not like,
Great point.
yeah, let's kill all the 16-year-olds. Definitely condemning those actions, but I would say I agree with you. She's definitely
Yeah.
visually the most interesting character, and I would say character-wise,
Yeah, would you say like Marvel definitely did borrow a lot? Well, it's sort of like Disney borrowing from Disney in the sense, isn't it? But like, do you think Marvel did use the Evil Queen as an inspiration for Hela and Thor Ragnarok at all?
yeah, they must have done. I mean, obviously, you know, you have the headpiece substituted, you know, by the horns, and then you have, you know,
The green.
the black ensemble and the green flames. You know, it is incredibly similar. So, you know, also I feel like, you know, obviously Disney has made this an adaptation from the Brothers Grimm tale, and then you know they're using the Brothers Grimm tale in inspiration for
Yeah,
Marvel comics. So they are sort of like mingling universes in a way that does scream on originality, but
yeah,
it doesn't lessen my enjoyment of the Hela character or my enjoyment of this film.
not at all, man, not at all. So I'm just happy to go by your remarks, man, buddy. Have you got a lot to say about this one?
I do have a lot to say
Good
about this
man.
film.
Good. No, that's good, man. That's good.
So the film opens with you know the presentation of the child of Princess Aurora, and obviously Maleficent enters, and she is enraged that she hasn't been invited. But you know before that occurs, we're introduced to the character of Prince Philip, who has been betrothed at birth to Princess Aurora. And then people are sort of kneeling and pledging their allegiance. And I'm telling you right now, I would not be pledging allegiance to any kingdom that supports like child brides or arranged marriage.
Oh man, tell me about it. And you know, we've talked. It's we've talked before about, you know, those sort of things like the classic Disney fairy tale of the royal family and stuff. And you know, I don't want to get into like the monarchy in today's society and stuff. But does it feel weird? It feels crazy to me that technically the royal family presented in this film, it's not too far away from the royal families that exist in places like the UK, you know, in the country we live in, and
Yeah,
in the countries in the Middle East where, you know, to a certain extent, you know, arranged marriages are very common. So it's crazy, isn't it, man, that we live in a society that
yeah,
still is dictated by a royal family because they have to sign off on the laws, don't they? So
yeah. I mean, what one way in which we are lucky is that they it is more of a ceremonial role. Obviously, they do need to sign the laws. Like the Queen needs to sign the laws, but she in her entire reign has not refused to sign one. And
yeah,
if she did, there would be war between the government and the Queen.
sure.
So I'm glad that we have more regulation, but it does concern me that there are countries in the world that are like this, that they just say, oh yeah, we're the royal family, we're here by nepotism. We decide the laws, we decide who lives or dies, and we decide who you marry. Like
Yeah,
it scares me, and it's once again sort of the Peter Pan problem, where they portray these people as the protagonists, the people that hold this power over their kingdom. And they talk about like, oh, a kind king, a wise king, a
yeah.
nice royal family, the beautiful Princess Aurora, the wonderful Princess Aurora. And I'm like, is that just sycophancy so that they don't get
Yeah.
murdered? I guess.
I guess. And you know, one thing I'm really interested to ask you, Callum, is, you know, you're very like you're a very intricate guy. You know, you explain points really well, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on like, where do you see like the royal family, not just our royal family, but like royal families in general heading? Do you think there are a thing of the past and they're starting to die out, or do you think it's a thing that will be there in 100 lifetimes, in 100 years? Because we sort of see now, especially in our royal family in the UK. I say our royal family as if we're related to them. Like the UK royal family, they're more of,
Yeah.
you know, they're more of like front page tabloid gossip rather than lawmakers, or in this case, like arranged marriages, or anything like that. So where do you think it's going? Do you think it's going to be more common? Do you think it's dying out?
See, I would have thought, oh, the fact that it's just, regulated to like trashy tabloids, normally you would think, oh, well, then, they're gonna like fade away. People aren't gonna care anymore. But, that's all that, news is, with sort of Donald Trump's popularization of fake news and, the now importance of, tabloids mixed with media, mixed with politics, and
Mhm.
them sort of being one and the same, where, people talk about politics through Twitter or they talk about politics in the tabloids. I feel like them being splashed over the tabloids actually creates public interest and this
Yeah.
false consciousness that the royal family is important in any way. Which obviously they signed laws, but anyone could do that. The laws have been scrutinized by the government, so you know I think that the perception that they're important, that they plaster on the tabloids, creates public interest, and that will fuel the fire that keeps them going. So I think having them in these tabloids actually perpetuates their existence.
That's such, you've smashed it again, man. I don't expect anything less from you. I think you nailed that, and especially in the royal family in this film, and to a certain extent, I suppose the evil queen, the queen, I suppose she is of royal family, uh, heritage herself. She's brutal. The one birthday wish she gives Sleeping Beauty or Aurora is like, she will prick her finger and die. Like, that is brutal, man, for a kids film.
Yeah. I'm not actually sure, like in this story, whether she's like whether she has like royal blood or monarchy or anything. Because in Maleficent, the film, she's like queen of the fairies. Like queen of this land called the Moors, which is
Okay.
she rules over all the other fairies. And then the like I'll give you some mild spoilers for like the
Go
first
for it.
15 minutes of
Yeah, go
Maleficent.
for it.
Basically, her issue with the king is that he like drugged her and stole her wings when she was a fairy, so that he could like present them to the king at the time, and then he could marry her like his daughter. So King Stefan, which is Aurora's dad, was actually like drugged Maleficent and stole her wings. So that's the context in Maleficent that makes her a sympathetic character. So if we sort of take that in here, she clearly has royal blood. She if we take that as sort of the backstory to this character in this universe, yes, she does have royal blood. She has power, and that sort of makes her more scary because of her authoritative nature.
Absolutely, man. And I think she's a really compelling character here, and I'd love to see more done with her character in the future.
Yeah, I mean, recently, we had the sequel of Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, I believe it was, and I'm sort of looking forward to watching those films and discussing them with you because I haven't actually seen the sequel, and I would sort of like to see how they expand the Sleeping Beauty universe beyond this story. Because I mean, pretty
Yeah.
much Maleficent is just Sleeping Beauty again, but told from the perspective of Maleficent. Like it's 80% the same. So I assume they have to step outside source material and do something different with the sequel. So that's actually the one I'm more interested in watching, honestly.
Yeah, man, and it's so interesting, man, because I've never seen an Angelina Jolie movie, and I think I can't imagine anyone better to play Maleficent than her. Or maybe I suppose Kate Blanchett would have done a good job because they look very similar. But it's just something about them. I think it's that perfect casting, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely visually, she sort of has like the high cheekbones and
Oh, her
the
facial
right
structure
bone
is like
structure and like
incredible.
yeah, and
Like,
sort of the pale visual. Uh, her English accent has actually been praised. I never actually realized she was doing one. Just because I guess I wasn't paying enough attention. Like, do you sort of get that? It's only ever when an accent's bad that you notice it. Like, I never listen and go, "Oh, what a good fake accent." Like, I go, like I'm either tricked into believing it's their real accent, or I think that sounds fake as shit. I never
yeah,
go, "That's a fake accent and it's good." I just feel like I've never had that feeling.
it's a great point. Yeah, that's I agree, man, and I'm looking forward to those films actually to watch them with you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So we talked about the gifts that Aurora is given,
Yeah.
and one is by one of the fairies. And I'm going to be trashing the fairies in this review. Like, I fucking hate them. Like,
Oh.
talk about the villains of the film. Like, I fucking hate them, and you will hear that. But one of them gives her the gift of song, and in my opinion, a curse. Because who actually likes that? I don't think I've ever met a person who like sings out loud that I've been like, oh wow, you're so talented. Like I feel like even if it's good, I'd be annoyed. And that sounds mean, But I mean, it's just me living my truth, you know.
Yeah, go for it. And you know what it is like? You see, yeah, like the fairies don't go, yeah, let's give her an iPad. Let's give her an Xbox. They're just like, let's just give her the gift of song. Yeah, what kid would want that?
Yeah, and they sort of go like, oh, you know, we're gonna give her one gift each, you know, no more, no less. And I'm like, maybe go for more. You have magic, you know. It doesn't have a limit. You don't have to pay for it. You know, maybe splash out. You know, if the king and queen are your best buds, you know, splash out a little.
It's weird because I actually really like the fairies, but the use of magic is it's what's really problematic to me because there seems like there's absolutely no restrictions to it whatsoever. So it just takes away all consequences, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we'll certainly get on to the fairies because I feel like it's like pretty much every other point is like the fairies are shit. Something else, the fairies are shit. Something
Yeah.
else, the fairies are shit. You know that's pretty much how my notes go. But you know the next thing I think we need to talk about is the fact that you know Aurora is whisked away to the forest to be hidden away by the fairies. But Maleficent, fuck my life, Maleficent never said you know I'm gonna come over and prick your finger. She said like you're going to prick your finger. So I don't really see how you imagine burning the spinning wheels or hiding her from Maleficent is going to help because I mean she's compelled by a curse. You know,
Yeah.
I don't see how they think that they're beyond magic.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Terminator scenario where, like, Skynet sends back Terminator, or sorry, yeah, like the Resistance is trying to kill Terminators, but Judgment Day is inevitable, as is seen by sort of Terminator Dark Fate. Spoilers for that movie if you hasn't seen it. Like, Skynet or whatever the company's called in that scenario keeps sending back Terminators regardless. So it's regardless. It's still going to be a curse. So I just had the note as
Yeah,
similar to what you said. Surely Sleeping Beauty would have been safer in a huge castle with a personal army
yeah,
rather than three grannies in a cottage. And I say three grannies, that is quite literally what they are for 16 years because they're like, we don't need magic anymore. Like, come on.
yeah. Yeah, sort of like just to go back quickly, like you know, with Terminator, I assume that's just you know human instinct to survive. You know, they won't just let it go and say, oh yeah, like we're gonna have like a nuclear war in 1 year. Yeah, let's just let that
Sure,
happen. You know, so
sure.
they just instinctively, at least they know they can't stop it, but they can keep pushing it back and pushing it back. But I
Sure.
mean, this is a curse. Like this will happen. So I mean, you may as well like enjoy the 16 years that you have with your parents.
All right. Yeah.
And then you know it turns out that like Prince Philip was her true love regardless. So I mean, you know, she could have just enjoyed her 16 years in a castle, had a good time,
Yeah.
you know,
What's the
as a princess.
what's the age gap there between them two? Because she's on the film goes explicitly says she's on the cusp of adulthood because she's 16 and stuff. So she's
Yeah,
15, 16. Well, we'll say 16 to be fair, and he must be at least 20, right?
yeah. We witness her 16th birthday, and you know that's what happens around like the you know a third or a middle into the film. But yeah, Prince Philip, we see him sort of like you know presenting himself as like a toddler or a young boy, you know, at her like presentation. Uh, so I have to assume that he's between like 4 and 6 years older than her, so 20 to 22, which I guess at this time wasn't the worst. You know, if it was already an arranged marriage, you know, them being of that age gap isn't horrific. In you know, what do they say? It's the 14th century.
Something like that. Yeah, something like
So
that.
I mean, you know, we sort of talk a lot about true love on the podcast, love at first sight and such. And
Absolutely.
in this film,
Absolutely.
you know, we made the distinction in Snow White that it never said true love's first kiss; it said love's
Love
first kiss.
Christmas. Yeah.
So that Prince Charming was just one of her potential loves, but in this instance, it is true love's kiss. So that means that Philip and Aurora are true loves. But do you think that was just destiny that she had to go away and become this person? Or do you think they would have been true loves regardless of whether
Ooh.
she grew up like privileged and nepotistic? Like, do you think her personality would have changed and therefore they wouldn't have been suited for each other?
That's such a great question, Callum. I like to think in regardless of what happened in real life or in the Disney sort of world, like you know, true love is sort of destined in a sense. So I suppose it's all about like you know you can have a true love, but whether you actually interact with them or actually meet them is another matter. Like I like to think that you do. I like to think that you do, but I suppose I think if she stayed with her parents and grew up to be a totally different person to what she did with the three fairies. I like to think that they would have still ended up together in a sweet way. I don't know. What about you, mate? What about you?
Yeah, I think that they became true loves because of circumstance. So I think that
Mhm.
she was
Okay.
fated to move in with the fairies and become that person.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So
I
I,
respect.
I feel like her being a princess was never, on the cards. So her becoming that person was never on the cards. So
Fair enough.
she was always fated to be perfect for him. It's just that she was never fated to not be the person that she was.
Yeah.
So you've sort of talked about how the three fairies sort of became like grannies, and they just moved into a cottage and raised this child. And Cinderella refers to the three fairies as her aunties. But how are they portraying this relationship to Aurora? Are they a throuple, or are they just like three best buds who are raising a kid together? How are they portraying this relationship to her?
That's an interesting one. Uh, how loud was that siren in your room? I could hear it from here.
Very, yeah,
Was it?
very.
Yeah, like that was great. That was great. I felt like I was in your room for a second. I've missed that. I've missed that. Anyway, yeah, it's a weird one because like I think the dynamic between the three fairies is actually quite funny. I think it's quite good because they have like banter with each other, if you can call it that. One of them says like, "Oh, this dress looks awful on me," and then one of them replies, "That's because it's on you, dear." I was like, "That is absolutely brutal." But I don't know how they're portraying it to Sleeping Beauty. Maybe it's like I don't
Are
know.
they saying like we're all your aunts and we're sisters? Or are they saying
Hmm,
one of us is your aunts and the rest are metaphorical aunts and we're just best buds? Or, we're in a three-person relationship? Like, you
that's an
know,
interesting one. Yeah,
obviously it doesn't dwell on that or go deep into that, but also they've been, secluded for 16 years. They may well be in a relationship and they just don't go into that in this film.
yeah,
So I mean, I guess it's just about how they present it to Aurora, and it's
yeah,
probably just three sisters raising a kid together, which
yeah.
in itself is unorthodox.
Unorthodox for sure, but I know I think it works in the film. To be fair, and I think the magic, as much as that we have criticized it, I think that it definitely adds a great element of color to the film. Like it looks fantastic.
Yeah, and sort of talking about the magic and this fucking bullshit timeline and stuff.
Oh, tell
So
me about it, bro.
the fairies basically tell Aurora that once she turns 16 she'll become a princess and that they'll return her to the castle. But I mean, you're literally going like the day of slash the day after the curse was meant to happen. Like, do you not really consider, oh, it might happen a day later? You're just like, it's been exactly 16 years, fuck it. Also, the
Yeah,
fairies are like, it's been one day shy of 16 years, and we know that on the 16th day, she's meant to prick her finger, and Maleficent has been looking for her for 16 years. Now is the time to use magic. We've handled 16 years without it, but let's use it on the day that Maleficent is specifically looking for her.
yeah. It's a weird one, man. It's such a good. It feels like it's just plot for plot's sake almost. And that being said, I think the third act is incredibly fast paced. Maybe rushed well, it certainly is rushed to an extent, but I think it's very compelling. I actually really enjoy like the Prince. I was about to call him Prince Charming, Prince Philip, like because they are so similar. As versus like the dragon is so cool. I suppose that is Maleficent, but I thought that was good. However, the fairies feel way too powerful, buddy. It feels ridiculous at a point, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And sort of speaking of the prince role in the film, I think this is probably the best prince princess romance that we've seen,
Oh
because
yeah,
it actually pays attention to the prince and the princess. Pretty much it's like the prince is just sort of a minor character in the princess's life, but then they get married and live happily ever after. But the prince seems to have no personality whatsoever. It was actually nice to see a side of the prince that we hadn't seen before.
it is great. It is great, man, completely. And this film sort of reminds me of Brave. We've covered that on the channel before, and in the similar sense of like the arranged marriage, and also like the king. Meredith's father, or in this case, Aurora's father, is friends with another king who want to set up a marriage between the two. And it's sort of a similar theme that's explored in Brave, which I thought was interesting. And yeah, you know what it is like on this topic of like the fairies. They say the magic can only do good things, but then they turn like a vulture into a statue. And I thought, like, is that good?
Yeah, their magic is incredibly inconsistent, because also when Maleficent arrives, they say, "Oh, she's too powerful. We can't counteract the curse." But also, they're able to put a caveat on it, and then later they're able to create weapons that can kill Maleficent, but they couldn't create a spell that could counteract her magic. But
I
they can
know.
literally
I
create a
know.
sword that kills her. You know, like I have a huge problem with portraying the fairies as protagonists when they're clearly, inept antagonists, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
also, they have no idea what they're capable of, and pretty much that's completely to the detriment of Aurora, because
Yeah.
one, she didn't get to live her life with her parents, and two, she was put at great, she was put in great danger when the fairies easily could have done something with their magic.
It's a great point. You know, half the film they spent time bickering about the color of Aurora's dress, doesn't it, as well? And like it sort of feels
Yeah,
to me
and
like
that petty an argument leads Maleficent to them.
I know, and it sort of feels to me like I actually like not to get too much into the fashion, but I actually prefer the pink color because the blue feels too much like Cinderella to me.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that the pink dress is synonymous with the character of Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah,
And if you look at posters for the film, she is wearing the pink dress, but she never actually wears that in the film.
I
And
know
it,
it's
it, wa- it
weird.
was just it was just to avoid the comparisons to Cinderella. But it feels like the movie feels to separate her from Cinderella because she's in the blue dress throughout the film.
It does.
Even though they tried to dodge that in marketing, it doesn't actually work when you watch the film.
Yeah,
And we sort of talked about the fairy setting the rules of the curse, because Maleficent obviously creates it, but the fairies change it to say that you can be woken up with true love's kiss, but they literally can't do anything right. Like, they know that she needs a true love's kiss to be woken up, but then they plan to put everyone to sleep, including the person that could hypothetically be her true love.
I know. I
They
know.
at that moment they don't know that it's Philip, but they know it's someone. But then they're like, "Fuck it, put everyone to sleep until we can sort this out." It's like, but then what? Like, they can't do anything right.
I know, man. It is. It's very lazy writing from that, and like I'm not going to be too critical in the writing because I couldn't write something as good as this, to be honest. But I think the writing in this is quite lazy because it feels like it's just trying to drag and drag and drag. And it's strange because I don't think this film drags in the same sense that other films that we've talked about recently on the podcast. It's not that bad, it's not like Snow White bad, where it's like, well, Snow White's not bad, but like the middle part of Snow White, nothing happens. We've talked about it's just dwarves washing themselves pretty much. But this film,
Yeah,
it's reasonably paced. I got to give it that. But that being said, like the writing's just incredibly lackluster for me, plot wise. I mean, especially with the fairies, man.
yeah. I think the fairies are easy to criticize, and one further criticism, which is going to be, I was like, is this going to be my final one of the fairies? Uh, yes, yes, it will be my final criticism of the fairies.
Go for
That
it.
they have the magic to turn themselves into humans, but they never think to turn Philip into a fairy so that he can like shrink down and fly out of his prison.
It's a
Instead,
great
they
point.
have him like riding a horse at full speed and battling Maleficent when they could have very easily counteracted that by
Yeah.
a very simple solution, I
Um,
would think.
yeah, Maleficent's spells are also just absolute dog shit. Like she just creates some like weeds and he just like cuts through them with a sword. Everything's dandy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like most of the magic in this film is either immensely overpowered or easily counteracted. So there's quite a huge
The
inconsistency.
dragon's cool. I like the dragon.
Uh, yeah, and the dragon is Maleficent's most powerful form because she can also breathe fire and also perform magic. So she's like, not only a defensive character with magic, she's also offensive with her
Mhm.
magical abilities.
Yeah.
But then the fairies, as I said, are able to create a weapon that can kill her in her most powerful form, but they can't think of a simple spell to stop the curse.
I know.
Like,
I
it's
know.
it's baffling.
It is bad. That's definitely the right word for it, buddy. It leaves much to be desired, to be honest.
Yeah. Did you have any final thoughts on the film, Matthew?
Nothing for me, buddy. Anything for me? If not, I'd love to hear your rating, partner.
Yeah, just the rating for me, I guess. So, I really appreciated the romance in this film. I've never said that about a Disney film up until this point. I think it's definitely the strongest one, especially for a prince princess relationship. We saw a different side of the prince that we had never seen. I would say undoubtedly the best Disney villain to
Oh
date.
yeah.
I'd say Captain Hook comes close to this, but I would say Maleficent is probably the strongest. Some of the best animation to this point. I would say probably the best animation that we've seen up until this point. Uh, I really expected for this to drag and for me to find it dull and boring, but I actually really enjoyed it. it's probably the best time that I've had with all the films that we've discussed so far
Awesome.
in our Disney analysis. So
Awesome.
I'd have to give it probably a 9 out of 10.
Awesome, buddy. I'm pleasantly surprised at that, mate. That was fantastic, and I'd have to agree. I think this is a fantastic romance. Certainly up there with Cinderella and Lady and the Tramp for me. And yeah, man, this is actually quite an underrated one. You know, I had read that this was quite harshly received upon its initial release until it became a Disney classic, which is surprising, given it's so. Maybe that's why, because it was so similar to Cinderella and Snow White and yada yada yada. But you know, I had a great time with this, man. The villain, fantastic. As you said, the colors and the anime, especially the colors, man. Animation's so good. I'd give it a 9 as well, buddy. I think, you know, I've been quite critical of it, to be fair, and I know it's pretty underrated. I think it's pretty great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I suppose, man, that leaves us to jump into our conclusion and our future episode discussion. Then, so man, what episode? What's our next episode going to be about?
So we may need to take a few days to get our bearings in all the films that we're talking about, because we
Yeah,
have a big episode planned. You know, a huge special discussion of quite a vague genre that I chose, but you know it's
I
sort of
like it,
looking
man.
back
I like it.
on on incredibly classic films that we haven't touched on, that you know people. I think a lot of people don't actually enjoy these films, but you know they have to be recognized for their importance to the film industry.
Mhm.
So we're going to be doing a American classics episode, and I think we should maybe leave our selection to the day that we
Oh, I
debut it.
think
You know,
so. I think so.
we can tell them for the episode. But we'll be discussing 5 films, 5 massive influential films on the American film industry. So that's probably the episode that I've looked forward to most in a while.
Me too, man. Certainly since probably unconventional romances for me. Actually, I'm really hyped for this one. And you know what it is? I think this will probably be just a little. If anyone's listening to this point in the podcast, this is probably going to be our longest episode yet. I'd imagine it wouldn't be surprised viewers if this hits the
Yeah,
3 hour mark or more than 3 hours, to be honest. So I'm looking
yeah,
forward to
because I
it.
mean, unconventional romances. I think we hit around like 2 hours 40 when we're talking about
2:40.
4 films.
Yeah.
This time we're talking about 5 films, and one of them is the longest. I think it's the longest film ever made, or at least certainly up there. So I think it'll be a very long discussion.
Yeah, and we're not just taking off like critically acclaimed films. We're also taking off a lot of financially successful films because Gone with maybe not going to mention the name of. Can I mention Gone with the Wind, or shall I let that out?
You
Just as a
mentioned
little
Gone with the
teaser.
Wind, sure.
Gone with the Wind. It's a class. It's American classic, a classic American classic, if that makes sense. And it hit like $3 billion, didn't it? Adjusted for inflation, I mean.
Yeah, it is. It is the most financially successful film of all time, like topping Avengers Endgame, and it doesn't get the respect it deserves because, you know, it came out in was it the 30s? The 30s or the
It was
no, it was the
39,
40s or the 50s.
1939.
1939. Shit. So it's fucking old. And it made so much money, and no one talks about its success. I've heard obviously you know some cultural criticisms of it, and I'm looking forward to you know watching that and drawing that from it to see whether you know we agree with the sort of cancel culture consensus of the film. You
Absolutely.
know, obviously we dig into you know and obviously recognize when we see cultural offensive cultural depictions. So if that is prevalent there, we'll obviously be harsh on the film for those portrayals. So I'm sort of looking forward to being part of you know the classic American film industry, and you know seeing what it was like back then.
Absolutely, mate. This is probably one of my favorite episodes to look forward to. At least, like I'm really excited for that. So, yeah. Please be sure. Well, thank you very much, guys, for listening. We really do appreciate it. And yeah, by this point, the 50th episode suggestion video should be up. So yeah, go back to that video and leave your comments for any topics you want us to discuss or any questions you have for Callum and I. Will definitely be sure to answer those in the video or in the podcast rather. But yeah, thank you very much, guys, for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and share your thoughts about these films if you've seen them or would like to share your thoughts in the comment section down below. Callum
Yeah.
and I will
If you
definitely.
think fucking an alien is bestiality, let us know down below.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Callum, I think you've absolutely smashed it today, mate. I think you made some of your best points you've made in the podcast in general, man. You're just getting better and better. So kudos to you on that one, man. You smashed it. great recording with you today, buddy, and hope you guys enjoyed. Take care. See ya, and bye bye.
Bye bye.